Hello, beautiful soul. I'm Aurora, and welcome to Twin Flame Journey, a space where we explore the deeper meaning behind soul connections, divine timing, and the path that leads two hearts back to union. If you've been feeling the signs, you're in the right place.
What if the relationship you believe is your twin flame union isn't the real union at all? That question alone can shake the foundation of everything someone believes about their spiritual connection. For many people walking the twin flame path, the idea of union feels like the final destination, the moment when separation ends, love wins, and two souls finally come together in harmony. But the truth is far more complicated than that, because sometimes what looks like union isn't actually union. Sometimes, two twin flames come back together physically, emotionally, or even romantically, yet something still feels off. The connection is there. The attraction is undeniable. The bond feels powerful, magnetic, almost supernatural. And yet beneath the surface, tension still exists. Old wounds still appear. Fear still whispers in the background. So the real question becomes this: how do you know whether you are experiencing true union or something that only looks like it? This is where we need to talk about a concept that many people on the twin flame journey rarely discuss openly: false union. The illusion of arrival. For many twin flames, the journey is intense from the very beginning. When they first meet, something extraordinary happens. It often feels like recognition on a soul level, a feeling that you have known this person forever, even if you just met them days or weeks ago. Conversations flow effortlessly. Eye contact feels electric. There is a strange sense of familiarity that cannot easily be explained. Many describe it as if two mirrors suddenly appeared in front of each other. Every emotion becomes amplified. Every strength is reflected. Every insecurity is exposed. And because the connection is so powerful, many people assume that if the relationship eventually comes back together after separation, that must mean the twin flame journey has finally reached its ultimate stage: union. But what if reunion is not the same thing as union? What if being together physically does not necessarily mean that the deeper spiritual alignment has actually occurred? This is where the illusion of arrival begins. Imagine someone who has spent years waiting for their twin flame to come back. During separation, they think constantly about the moment when everything will finally work out. They imagine that once they reunite, all the confusion will disappear. The pain will vanish. The misunderstandings will end. The love will finally flow effortlessly. But then reunion happens. And for a while, it feels exactly like the dream they imagined. The conversations are deep. The chemistry is still intense. The emotional bond feels stronger than ever. Yet slowly, something else begins to emerge. The same patterns that existed before separation start appearing again. Arguments return. Misunderstandings resurface. Jealousy or insecurity begins to creep back in. Suddenly, the relationship feels intense again, but not necessarily peaceful. And that's when many people quietly start asking themselves a question they're almost afraid to admit. If this is union, why does it still feel so unstable? When love still feels like a battlefield. One of the most confusing aspects of the twin flame journey is that intensity can easily be mistaken for alignment. Because the emotions are so powerful, people often assume that strong feelings automatically mean the connection is spiritually evolved. But intensity alone does not equal harmony. In fact, many twin flame connections go through periods where the emotional intensity actually increases when unresolved wounds are still active. Imagine two people who deeply love each other but have not yet fully healed their own inner fears. One partner may fear abandonment. The other may fear losing their independence. When they come together, those fears do not magically disappear. Instead, they often become amplified by the closeness of the relationship. One person may become more controlling, trying to protect the relationship from imagined threats. The other may pull away emotionally, trying to regain a sense of freedom. This creates a push-and-pull dynamic that feels painfully familiar to many twin flames. They love each other deeply, yet they also trigger each other constantly. And from the outside, it can still look like they are together. They might call it a relationship. They might call it reunion. Some might even call it union. But energetically, something is still unresolved. This is where the concept of false union begins to take shape. The subtle trap of false union. False union does not necessarily mean the connection is fake. It does not mean the twin flame bond is not real. Instead, false union describes a stage where two twin flames reconnect before the inner transformation required for true union is fully complete. In other words, the souls recognize each other, but the personalities are still learning how to evolve. In false union, love is present, but ego is still active. And ego can quietly reshape the relationship in ways that are easy to overlook. Instead of pure acceptance, subtle expectations appear. Instead of freedom, attachment grows stronger. Instead of emotional balance, reactions become more intense. For example, one partner may start thinking, if they truly love me, they should behave in a certain way.
Or,
if this is my twin flame, they should never hurt me again. But real spiritual growth rarely follows such simple rules. Even twin flames, perhaps especially twin flames, must confront their own unresolved shadows before reaching a state of deep harmony. So when those shadows are still present, the relationship can feel like a strange contradiction. Moments of incredible love followed by moments of emotional chaos. Deep connection followed by painful misunderstandings. Magnetic attraction followed by sudden distance. And because the bond is so powerful, many people try even harder to hold on to the relationship. They think if they just try a little more love, a little harder, fix a few more problems, then everything will finally stabilize. But sometimes the problem is not effort. Sometimes the problem is timing. The question most people avoid. Here is the uncomfortable truth that many people on the twin flame path eventually face. Not every reunion is the final union. Sometimes reunion happens as another stage of growth.
sometimes it appears as a test.
Sometimes it reveals exactly where healing is still needed. And that realization can feel incredibly confusing. Because if the connection is real, if the love is genuine, why would the relationship still feel difficult? The answer lies in a deeper truth about the twin flame journey. Union is not simply about two people being together. It is about two souls becoming internally aligned with themselves first. Without that inner alignment, even the strongest spiritual connection can still fall into patterns of control, fear, and emotional dependency. And that is why understanding the difference between false union and true union is so important. Because recognizing that difference can completely transform the way someone approaches their journey. Instead of asking, "How do I keep this person in my life?" the focus slowly shifts toward a different question. A deeper question. A more powerful question. Am I becoming the version of myself that is truly ready for union? And once someone begins asking that question honestly, the entire journey begins to change. Because true union doesn't begin the moment two people reunite. It begins the moment ego starts releasing its need to control the connection. And that transformation is where the real story begins. For many people walking the twin flame path, union is imagined as the ultimate reward. It is often described as the moment when everything finally falls into place. The struggles of separation end, misunderstandings disappear, and two souls who have been searching for each other across lifetimes finally live together in perfect harmony. In this vision, union looks almost like a spiritual fairy tale. Two people meet. They recognize each other as twin flames. They go through challenges. And eventually, they reunite and live happily ever after. No more running. No more emotional chaos. No more distance. Just love. Just peace. Just destiny fulfilled. But what if this idea of union is actually one of the biggest misconceptions on the twin flame journey? Because while the idea of perfect union sounds beautiful, reality often looks very different. And the moment someone realizes that difference can become a turning point in their entire spiritual awakening. The fantasy many twin flames carry. Before someone experiences the deeper stages of the twin flame journey, it is very easy to imagine union as the end of suffering. Many people think, when we finally come back together, everything will be easy. They imagine peaceful mornings together, Deep conversations late at night, emotional safety, and a love that never wavers. They believe that once union happens, all the triggers will disappear. The wounds from the past will somehow dissolve. The relationship will feel effortless. But this expectation creates a silent pressure inside the connection. Because when reality doesn't match that fantasy, confusion begins. Imagine two twin flames who finally reconnect after years of separation. They meet again, unexpectedly. The chemistry is still there. The emotional recognition is immediate. Their conversations feel deep and meaningful, almost as if no time has passed. For a while, everything feels magical. It feels like the universe has finally aligned. And both of them may believe that the long-awaited union has finally arrived. But slowly, the illusion begins to crack. Not because the love is fake, but because love alone cannot erase unresolved wounds. Why reunion can feel perfect at first. The early phase of reunion often feels incredibly powerful. When twin flames come back together, there is usually a strong emotional surge. Memories return. Feelings that were buried during separation suddenly resurface. The connection feels alive again. Many people describe this stage as a second honeymoon phase. There is excitement,
hope,
a sense that destiny is unfolding. Both partners may feel grateful that they found their way back to each other. But beneath that excitement, something else is quietly happening. All the emotional patterns that existed before separation are still present. They were simply dormant. Separation may have created distance, but it did not automatically heal everything. And once the closeness returns, those patterns slowly begin to reveal themselves again. Perhaps one partner becomes afraid of losing the relationship again, so they begin to watch the other person more closely. They read deeper meanings into small changes in behavior. A delayed message suddenly feels suspicious. A canceled plan feels like rejection. The fear of losing the connection starts shaping their reactions. At the same time, the other partner might feel overwhelmed by the emotional intensity. They may still care deeply, but they might also feel a quiet pressure building inside the relationship. And without realizing it, the same dynamic that caused separation in the past begins to reappear. When old patterns return, this is the moment when many twin flames begin to feel confused, because they believed that reunion meant the problems were over. Yet suddenly, the same emotional triggers begin resurfacing. Arguments happen again. Misunderstandings repeat themselves. The same insecurities that existed before begin appearing in new forms. And when that happens, people often react in one of two ways. Some become anxious. They start trying harder to make the relationship work. They overthink every interaction. They try to fix every problem quickly, hoping to protect the union from falling apart again. Others begin pulling away. They feel overwhelmed by the intensity. They worry that the relationship will trap them in emotional conflict again. So they create distance to protect themselves. What makes this situation so confusing is that both people still feel the connection. They still care deeply. They still recognize something unique about the bond they share. Yet the relationship still feels unstable. And that contradiction creates one of the most painful questions on the twin flame journey. If this is supposed to be divine love, why does it still feel so difficult? The difference between chemistry and alignment. One of the most important realizations on the twin flame path is this. Emotional intensity is not the same as spiritual alignment. Twin flames almost always experience intense chemistry. Their energy fields recognize each other. Their emotions become amplified in each other's presence. Even their life paths often seem mysteriously intertwined. But chemistry alone cannot sustain a stable union. Alignment requires something deeper. It requires emotional maturity. It requires self-awareness. It requires the ability to love without trying to control the outcome. When those qualities are still developing, the connection can feel incredibly powerful, but also incredibly unstable. In other words, the bond is real, but the foundation is still evolving. And that is why reunion does not automatically mean union. The hidden purpose behind this stage. At first glance, this stage can feel like a failure. Many people believe that if reunion does not immediately lead to perfect harmony, something must have gone wrong. But in reality, this stage often serves an important purpose. It reveals exactly what still needs to heal. Without this stage, many people would never see their own patterns clearly. Imagine someone who believes they are emotionally balanced and spiritually evolved. But once they reunite with their twin flame, jealousy suddenly appears. Fear of abandonment becomes stronger. The desire to control the relationship emerges. These reactions are not punishments. They are mirrors. They show exactly where deeper healing is still needed. And while that realization can be uncomfortable, it is also incredibly valuable, because it creates the opportunity for real transformation. The moment the illusion breaks. Eventually, most people on the twin flame path reach a moment when they begin to see the situation more clearly. They realize that simply being together does not automatically create harmony. They realize that the connection still reflects their own inner state. If there is fear inside, the relationship will reveal that fear. If there is insecurity inside, the relationship will magnify that insecurity. And if there is peace inside, the relationship will eventually reflect that peace as well. This realization changes everything. Because instead of focusing entirely on the relationship, the focus slowly shifts inward. Instead of trying to force union externally, the journey becomes about creating union internally. Healing,
growth,
self-understanding, emotional independence. And that shift is where the twin flame journey truly deepens. Because the goal is no longer just reunion. The goal becomes transformation. A different way to see union. When people let go of the fantasy of instant perfect union, something surprising happens. The pressure begins to dissolve. The need to force the relationship into a certain shape starts fading. And in that space, something healthier begins to grow. Instead of trying to control the connection, individuals begin focusing on their own inner balance. Instead of asking when union will happen, they begin asking how they can evolve. This shift may seem subtle at first, but it changes the entire direction of the journey. Because real union is not created through pressure. It is created through alignment. And alignment can only happen when both people are able to stand in their own emotional stability. That is when the relationship stops feeling like a battlefield. That is when love stops feeling like a struggle. That is when union stops being a dream and starts becoming a natural result of growth. But before someone can reach that stage, they must first understand the forces that keep false union alive. And one of the most powerful of those forces is the ego. When people first hear the term false union, it can feel uncomfortable or even unsettling. After all, if two twin flames have already reunited, if they are already together in a relationship, how could that union possibly be false? Does it mean the connection itself is not real? Does it mean the love was an illusion? Or worse, does it mean the entire twin flame journey was misunderstood from the beginning? The answer is far more nuanced than that. False union does not mean the twin flame connection is fake. It does not mean the bond between two souls is imaginary. In many cases, the connection is very real, very powerful, and deeply transformative. What false union describes is something different. It describes a stage where two twin flames come back together before the deeper inner alignment required for true union has fully developed. In other words, the souls have recognized each other, but the human parts of them are still learning how to grow. When reunion happens too soon. One of the most common misunderstandings in the twin flame journey is the belief that reunion automatically equals union. But reunion is simply the moment when two people come back into each other's lives. Union, on the other hand, is something much deeper. Union represents a state of energetic harmony, emotional maturity, and spiritual balance that allows the relationship to exist without constant instability. When reunion happens before that level of alignment is formed, the relationship can fall into a state that looks like union from the outside, but still carries many unresolved tensions underneath. This is what we call false union. Imagine two twin flames who reconnect after years of separation. During that separation, both of them may have grown in certain ways. They may have learned valuable lessons, healed some emotional wounds, and gained new perspectives on life. When they meet again, the connection still feels powerful. There is still recognition. There is still love. There is still that familiar magnetic pull that seems impossible to ignore. So they decide to try again. At first, it feels promising. They communicate more openly than before. They try to avoid the mistakes that caused the previous separation. They genuinely want the relationship to work. But slowly, subtle patterns begin to reappear. And these patterns reveal something important. The deeper transformation required for true union may not yet be complete. The hidden signs of false union. False union rarely announces itself loudly. It doesn't usually appear as obvious conflict or immediate chaos. In fact, many false unions can appear quite stable at first. From the outside, everything might look normal. The couple spends time together. They share experiences. They build routines. Friends and family may even believe that the relationship is finally working. But internally, certain emotional dynamics quietly continue operating beneath the surface. One of the most common signs is subtle control. Control doesn't always look aggressive or obvious. Sometimes it appears in very small behaviors. One partner may feel the need to constantly check on the other person. They might analyze messages carefully, looking for hidden meanings. They might worry about who their partner is spending time with, even when there is no real reason for concern. At the same time, the other partner may feel a quiet pressure in the relationship. They may feel that they must behave in a certain way to keep the peace. They may avoid expressing certain thoughts or emotions because they don't want to trigger conflict. And even though love still exists between them, the relationship begins to feel slightly tense, like a balance that could shift at any moment. The role of unresolved emotional wounds. False union often occurs when deeper emotional wounds are still active inside one or both partners. These wounds may have developed long before the twin flames even met. Childhood experiences, past relationships, moments of betrayal or abandonment. All of these experiences shape the way a person approaches love. For example, someone who grew up fearing abandonment may unconsciously seek constant reassurance in their relationship. They might ask questions like, "Do you still love me? Are you sure you're not losing interest? Why didn't you respond earlier?" Even if their partner has done nothing wrong, the fear itself begins influencing the relationship. Meanwhile, the other partner might carry a completely different wound. They may have spent years feeling controlled or restricted in previous relationships. So, when emotional intensity increases, they instinctively pull away to protect their independence. Now, imagine these two emotional patterns interacting with each other. One person moves closer for reassurance. The other moves away for space. The closer one moves, the further the other retreats. And the further one retreats, the more anxious the other becomes. This dynamic creates the classic push and pull cycle that many twin flames recognize. And even though both people may genuinely love each other, the relationship still feels unstable. Why false union feels so confusing? One of the reasons false union is so difficult to recognize is because the emotional connection between twin flames is incredibly powerful. Even when problems appear, the bond itself still feels meaningful. Both partners may still feel that they are meant to be together. They may still share deep conversations about life, spirituality, and personal growth. They may still support each other in ways that no one else has. Because of this, it becomes very difficult to admit that something inside the relationship still needs to evolve. Instead, people often assume that the instability is simply part of the twin flame journey. They believe that conflict is normal, that intensity is unavoidable, and that the relationship will eventually stabilize on its own. But without deeper self-awareness, the same patterns can repeat indefinitely. The relationship becomes a cycle of closeness and distance. Moments of love followed by moments of tension. Reconnection followed by emotional exhaustion. And while the connection itself remains real, the foundation for lasting harmony has not yet been fully built. The difference between attachment and alignment. At the heart of false union lies a subtle but powerful difference: attachment versus alignment. Attachment is driven by emotional need. It says, "I need this person in order to feel complete." It fears losing the relationship. It tries to protect the connection at all costs. Alignment, on the other hand, comes from inner stability. It says, I choose this connection because it enriches my life, not because I cannot survive without it. Alignment allows love to exist without fear controlling every decision. When a relationship operates from attachment, even strong love can become tangled in anxiety. But when a relationship operates from alignment, love becomes lighter, freer, more peaceful. False union often exists somewhere in between these two states. There is real love, but there is also lingering attachment. There is genuine connection, but there are still emotional reactions shaped by fear. And until those fears are faced and transformed, the relationship cannot fully evolve into true union. The hidden opportunity inside false union. While the term false union may sound negative at first, it actually represents an incredibly important stage of growth. Because this stage reveals the exact places where healing is still needed. It acts like a mirror, reflecting the emotional patterns that both partners must eventually confront. Without this mirror, many people might never realize how deeply certain fears influence their behavior in relationships. False union brings those patterns to the surface. It makes them visible. And once something becomes visible, it can finally be transformed. This is why some twin flames experience multiple reunions before reaching true union. Each reunion reveals new layers of growth. Each challenge exposes deeper levels of emotional healing. Each cycle pushes both individuals closer toward genuine self-awareness. Eventually, something begins to change. The desire to control fades. The fear of losing the relationship begins to loosen its grip. Both individuals start focusing more on their own inner balance than on forcing the relationship to work. And that shift, subtle but powerful, opens the door to a completely different kind of connection. A connection no longer driven by attachment. A connection no longer defined by emotional turbulence. A connection built on freedom, maturity, and deep inner peace. That connection is what we call true union. But before we can fully understand what true union looks like, we must first explore the force that most often keeps false union alive. And that force is something every human being carries within them.
The ego.
If false union has a central engine quietly driving its instability, that engine is the ego. The word ego is often misunderstood. Many people hear it and immediately think of arrogance, pride, or someone who constantly seeks attention. But in the context of relationships, especially the twin flame journey, ego operates in much more subtle and complicated ways. Ego is not simply arrogance. Ego is the protective identity the mind builds to survive emotional pain. It is the voice that tries to control situations so that we never feel rejected again. It is the part of us that fears abandonment. It is the inner mechanism that constantly asks, how do I make sure I don't get hurt? In everyday life, the ego can be helpful. It protects boundaries, keeps us alert to danger, and helps us navigate the world. But in deep spiritual relationships like twin flames, ego can also become the very thing that prevents true harmony. Because ego does not understand unconditional love. Ego understands control. The ego's hidden agenda. When two twin flames reconnect, the emotional intensity of the connection often activates the ego immediately.
Why?
Because the ego senses something powerful, something that could either bring incredible joy or deep emotional pain. And the ego hates uncertainty. So it begins quietly developing strategies to protect itself. These strategies may not even be conscious. They appear in small thoughts and reactions that seem harmless at first. For example, someone might think, I need to make sure they never leave again.
Or,
if they really love me, they should behave a certain way. Or even, I must hold on to this relationship, no matter what. At first glance, these thoughts may sound like expressions of love. But if we look deeper, we see something else beneath them.
fear.
Fear of loss. Fear of rejection. Fear of repeating past pain. And when fear drives behavior inside a relationship, the energy of the connection begins to shift. Love becomes mixed with anxiety. Affection becomes mixed with expectation. And the relationship slowly becomes a place where both people feel subtle pressure. When love becomes control. One of the clearest signs that ego is influencing a relationship is the appearance of control. Control rarely looks obvious in the beginning. It can appear in very small behaviors that seem normal or even caring. Someone might check their partner's phone frequently. They might ask detailed questions about who their partner spends time with. They might feel uncomfortable when their partner needs space. In their mind, they may believe they are simply protecting the relationship. But control always carries an invisible message. I don't fully trust that this connection will remain stable on its own. That lack of trust often comes from past emotional wounds. Perhaps the person has been betrayed before. Perhaps they were abandoned in previous relationships. Perhaps they learned early in life that love can disappear unexpectedly. So when they encounter a connection as powerful as a twin flame bond, the ego becomes extremely alert. It starts trying to prevent anything that might threaten the relationship. But ironically, the more control enters the connection, the more tension begins to grow. Because love cannot breathe freely in an atmosphere of control. The twin flame mirror. One of the most fascinating aspects of the twin flame journey is that each person often mirrors the other's internal struggles. If one partner begins operating from fear, the other partner will eventually feel that energy. And they will respond to it, sometimes in ways that intensify the situation even further. For example, if one partner becomes controlling because they fear abandonment, the other partner may start feeling restricted. Even if they love deeply, they may begin craving emotional space. So they pull away. But when they pull away, the first partner's fear increases, and their need for reassurance becomes stronger. This creates the classic twin flame dynamic known as the push and pull cycle. One person moves closer. The other steps back. The closer one moves again, the further the other retreats. Both people are reacting not to love itself, but to the ego-driven fears underneath the relationship. And because the emotional bond is so intense, these reactions can feel overwhelming. What began as a deep spiritual connection suddenly starts feeling like an emotional roller coaster. Moments of closeness are followed by sudden distance. Moments of peace are interrupted by unexpected conflict. And both partners may begin wondering why something so meaningful can also feel so exhausting. The ego's greatest illusion. The ego has one particularly powerful illusion that often appears during false union. It convinces people that love must be protected through effort and control. The ego believes that if someone just tries hard enough, communicates perfectly, fixes every problem quickly, avoids every possible misunderstanding, then the relationship will remain secure. But real love does not operate through constant control. Real love operates through trust. And trust cannot grow if both partners feel like they must constantly monitor the relationship to prevent it from collapsing. In fact, the stronger the ego tries to control the connection, the more fragile the relationship often becomes. Because control slowly replaces freedom. And without freedom, love begins to feel heavy. The fear behind the ego. If we look even deeper, we discover that ego is rarely malicious. It is simply afraid. Afraid of repeating painful experiences. Afraid of being abandoned. Afraid of feeling unworthy of love. When the ego senses that someone has encountered a connection as intense as a twin flame bond, it becomes extremely protective. It thinks, "This person matters so much I cannot afford to lose them." So it tries to secure the relationship through strategies that seem logical from a survival perspective. But these strategies rarely create the emotional safety the ego hopes for. Instead, they often create the very instability the ego fears. Because when someone feels controlled, pressured, or constantly analyzed, they may begin pulling away. Not because they don't care, but because their own sense of freedom feels threatened. A simple question that reveals everything. One powerful way to recognize ego within a relationship is to ask a simple question. Is my love driven by fear or by freedom? When ego leads the connection, thoughts often sound like this. What if they leave? What if they stop loving me? What if someone else takes them away? These questions create anxiety. They create urgency. They create the desire to control the future. But when love operates from a deeper place of inner stability, the questions begin to change. Instead of asking how to hold on to the relationship, someone begins asking, how can I grow into the healthiest version of myself? How can I love without fear controlling my actions? How can I create peace inside myself regardless of external circumstances? These questions shift the focus away from controlling the relationship and toward personal evolution. And that shift changes everything. The beginning of ego release. The moment someone becomes aware of the ego's influence, the process of transformation begins. This does not mean ego disappears overnight. In fact, releasing ego patterns can take time. Old habits may still appear. Moments of fear may still arise. But awareness creates space. It allows someone to pause before reacting. Instead of immediately responding with control or anxiety, they begin observing their emotions more calmly. They start recognizing which reactions come from love and which come from fear. And gradually, the relationship dynamic begins to change. The need to control weakens. The pressure inside the connection softens. Both individuals start breathing a little easier. This is the early stage of emotional maturity that eventually leads toward true union. Because true union cannot exist where ego dominates the relationship. True union emerges only when both individuals have learned to love without needing to control the outcome. And when that transformation begins, the entire energy of the connection starts shifting. Love becomes lighter. Communication becomes calmer. The connection stops feeling like a struggle. And instead of trying to possess each other, two people begin learning something far more powerful: how to stand in love without fear. Understanding false union in theory can be helpful, but sometimes the concept becomes much clearer when we see how it plays out in real life. Because false union rarely begins with obvious problems. In fact, it often begins with hope. Hope that the relationship has finally matured. Hope that the painful cycles of the past are over. Hope that love has finally found stability. To understand this more clearly, let's imagine a story that reflects what many twin flames experience on their journey. When two twin flames meet again. After several years of separation, Daniel and Sophia unexpectedly reconnect. Their first meeting after so much time apart feels almost surreal. The moment their eyes meet, both of them feel the same electric recognition they experienced years earlier when they first met. The emotional connection is still there, just as powerful, just as mysterious. They begin talking again. At first, cautiously. Both of them remember the intensity of their past relationship. They remember the arguments, the misunderstandings, the emotional highs and lows that eventually led them to separate. But they also remember the deep love they once shared. And now, standing in front of each other again, it feels like fate has given them another chance. For the first few weeks, everything feels surprisingly easy. They talk about how much they've grown. They share the lessons they learned during their time apart. Both of them genuinely believe they are different people now. More mature, more aware, more prepared for a healthy relationship. And for a while, it truly feels like they might be right. The honeymoon of reunion. During the early stage of their reunion, Daniel and Sophia experience something many twin flames describe as a second honeymoon phase. They spend long hours talking about life. They share dreams about the future. They laugh about old memories and how far they have come since their first relationship. Friends around them notice the change as well. The tension that once surrounded their relationship seems gone. Now they appear calm, supportive, and deeply connected. Even Daniel begins thinking to himself, maybe this is finally it. Maybe this is the union we were always meant to reach. Sophia feels something similar. After years of personal growth and healing, she believes the difficult lessons of the past are behind them. For the first time in a long while, both of them feel hopeful. And in that hopeful space, the relationship begins growing again. But beneath the surface, something subtle is still waiting to appear. Not because the love between them is fake, but because some emotional patterns have not yet fully healed. The first signs of tension. At first, the signs are small, almost invisible. One evening, Sophia sends Daniel a message asking if he wants to meet for dinner. Hours pass before he replies. When the message finally arrives, it's brief. Sorry, busy today. Maybe another time. On the surface, it seems harmless. But inside Sophia's mind, something begins stirring. A quiet thought appears. Why didn't he respond earlier? Another thought quickly follows. Is he losing interest again? Sophia tries to ignore the feeling. She tells herself she's overthinking. After all, Daniel has been kind and attentive in every other moment. But the small doubt remains in the background. A few days later, another situation happens. Daniel mentions that he spent the evening with some colleagues after work. One of them happens to be someone Sophia doesn't know. Suddenly, a familiar sensation appears again. Jealousy. Not intense, not explosive, just a quiet discomfort. She finds herself asking questions she didn't plan to ask. Who was there? Do you spend time with them often? Daniel notices the change immediately. And while he understands that Sophia may simply be curious, he also feels a subtle pressure beginning to form. When old patterns quietly return. As weeks pass, these small moments begin appearing more frequently. Sophia becomes slightly more attentive to Daniel's behavior. She notices when he takes longer to reply to messages. She wonders why he sometimes prefers spending an evening alone instead of meeting. None of these thoughts feel extreme in isolation. But together, they slowly create a sense of emotional tension inside the relationship. Daniel begins feeling it as well. At first, he tries reassuring Sophia. He explains his schedule. He clarifies misunderstandings. But over time, he starts feeling that he must constantly manage her concerns. And that feeling begins triggering something inside him. A need for space. Daniel has always valued independence. Even during their first relationship years earlier, he sometimes felt overwhelmed by emotional intensity. Now he begins feeling that pressure again. So he reacts in the only way he knows how. He creates distance. Not dramatic distance. Just small spaces. He replies to messages slightly later. He takes more time for himself. He focuses on work or hobbies when he needs to recharge. But every time Daniel pulls back slightly, Sophia feels the shift. And her anxiety quietly increases. The push and pull dynamic returns. Without realizing it, both of them have stepped back into a familiar pattern. Sophia senses distance and moves closer for reassurance. Daniel senses pressure and moves further away to protect his space. The closer she moves, the more he retreats. The more he retreats, the more anxious she becomes. Soon, small misunderstandings begin turning into arguments. Nothing dramatic at first. Just frustration. Sophia asks why Daniel seems distant. Daniel says he feels pressured. Sophia insists she just wants honesty. Daniel says he needs breathing room. Both of them feel hurt. Both of them feel misunderstood. And both of them wonder the same thing. How do we end up back here again? When love is still real, but not yet balanced. What makes this situation so confusing is that the love between them has never disappeared. Daniel still cares deeply about Sophia. Sophia still feels a powerful connection to Daniel. They still have moments where everything feels peaceful. Moments where they laugh, connect, and remember why they found each other so meaningful in the first place. But those peaceful moments are often followed by tension. And slowly, both of them begin questioning whether they truly solved the problems that separated them before. They thought they had grown enough. They believed the relationship was ready. But now they are beginning to realize something important. Growth during separation helped them understand many things. But some emotional patterns only appear inside the relationship itself. And until those patterns are truly healed, the connection will continue reflecting them. Why this stage is so important. What Daniel and Sophia are experiencing is not unusual on the twin flame journey. In fact, many twin flames pass through a stage like this before reaching deeper emotional maturity. This stage, the stage of false union, acts as a mirror. It reveals exactly where fears still exist, where attachment still influences behavior, where ego quietly tries to control the connection. Without this mirror, those patterns might remain hidden. And hidden patterns cannot be transformed. But when they become visible, something powerful becomes possible. Self-awareness. Daniel may eventually realize that his instinct to withdraw whenever he feels pressure prevents deeper emotional communication. Sophia may realize that her fear of losing the relationship causes her to seek constant reassurance. These realizations are not signs that the relationship is failing. They are signs that deeper healing is still unfolding. And once both individuals begin recognizing their own patterns, the possibility of a different kind of connection begins to appear. A connection no longer driven by fear. A connection no longer trapped in emotional cycles. A connection where both people can love without constantly reacting to their past wounds. That connection is not built through reunion alone. It is built through transformation. And that transformation is what eventually opens the door to something far more stable, far more peaceful, and far more powerful. Something known as true union. After understanding the concept of false union, the stage where love is real but still tangled with fear, ego, and unresolved wounds, a deeper question naturally arises. If false union feels intense, unstable, and driven by attachment, then what exactly is true union? Many people imagine true union as a perfect relationship where conflict never happens and everything feels magically easy. They picture a peaceful life where two twin flames finally settle into harmony, free from every struggle they experienced during separation. But the reality of true union is both simpler and deeper than that fantasy. True union is not the absence of challenges. True union is the presence of inner alignment. It is the moment when two people no longer depend on each other to feel complete, but instead choose each other from a place of wholeness. And that difference changes everything. The shift from need to choice. One of the most important transformations that happens before true union is the shift from needing the relationship to choosing the relationship. In false union, love is often mixed with emotional dependency. Someone may feel that their happiness depends on the other person's presence. Their peace depends on the other person's behavior. Their sense of worth depends on how the other person treats them. When the relationship feels stable, they feel secure. When the relationship becomes uncertain, their inner world begins to shake. This creates a fragile emotional foundation. Because if your inner balance depends on another person, every small change in the relationship can feel like a threat. But in true union, something profound is changed. Both individuals have learned how to stand emotionally on their own. They have faced their fears of abandonment. They have healed many of the wounds that once made them react defensively in relationships. They have learned how to create peace within themselves. So when they come together, they are not searching for someone to complete them. They are simply choosing to share life with someone who already resonates with who they have become. And when love comes from choice instead of need, the entire relationship feels lighter. Emotional sovereignty. Another key element of true union is something known as emotional sovereignty. This means that each person takes full responsibility for their own emotions rather than expecting their partner to regulate them. In false union, it is common for partners to unconsciously expect each other to provide constant reassurance. One person might feel upset and expect the other to immediately fix the situation. If that reassurance doesn't arrive quickly enough, anxiety begins growing. Arguments follow. Misunderstandings multiply. But in true union, emotional responsibility looks different. Each person understands that their feelings belong to them. If insecurity appears, they explore its root instead of projecting it onto their partner. If fear arises, they examine where it comes from rather than blaming the relationship. This does not mean that partners in true union ignore each other's emotions. They still support one another. They still communicate openly. But the difference is that they no longer expect the relationship itself to heal wounds that must be addressed internally. This creates a much healthier dynamic. Instead of two people constantly reacting to each other's emotional storms, the relationship becomes a space where both individuals can grow calmly. Love without possession. Perhaps the most beautiful quality of true union is the presence of love without possession. In many relationships, love becomes mixed with ownership. People begin thinking of their partner as something they must hold on to. They fear losing them. They monitor the relationship closely. They try to prevent anything that might threaten the connection. But in true union, love becomes something very different. It becomes spacious. It allows both individuals to remain fully themselves. Each person respects the other's independence. Each person understands that love cannot be forced or controlled. And because there is no constant fear of loss, the relationship becomes surprisingly calm. Imagine being with someone and knowing that they are not staying because they feel obligated. They are staying because they genuinely want to. Every day, every moment. That kind of love does not feel heavy. It feels peaceful. It feels free. The energy of peace. One of the most surprising things many people notice about true union is how calm it feels. After years of emotional intensity during the twin flame journey, many expect union to feel dramatic and passionate all the time. But true union often carries a completely different energy. Instead of constant highs and lows, there is a steady sense of peace. The relationship no longer feels like an emotional roller coaster. It feels like stability, safety, home. This doesn't mean passion disappears. The connection between twin flames remains incredibly deep. But the passion is no longer fueled by anxiety or fear. It comes from genuine appreciation for one another. Conversations feel easier. Misunderstandings are resolved more quickly. Both people feel safe expressing themselves honestly, without fearing that the relationship will collapse. And because there is less emotional turbulence, both individuals have more energy to focus on their personal purpose, creativity, and growth. The relationship stops consuming their entire emotional world. Instead, it becomes a supportive foundation for the life they are building. Two complete individuals. Another defining feature of true union is that both partners are able to function fully as individuals. In false union, the relationship often becomes the center of everything. Thoughts revolve around the connection. Emotions fluctuate based on what the other person is doing. Life begins revolving around maintaining the bond. But in true union, both individuals continue living meaningful lives outside the relationship. They pursue their passions. They develop their own interests. They maintain friendships and personal goals. The relationship becomes a partnership rather than an emotional dependency. This balance actually strengthens the connection. Because when two people are fulfilled individually, they bring more positivity and inspiration into the relationship. Instead of asking the relationship to provide everything, they contribute their own growth and energy to the connection. Conflict still exists, but it looks different. An important truth about true union is that conflict does not disappear entirely. After all, twin flames are still human beings with different personalities, perspectives, and life experiences. Disagreements will still happen, but the way those disagreements are handled changes dramatically. In false union, conflict often triggers deep emotional reactions. Arguments escalate quickly. Both people may feel defensive or misunderstood. In true union, conflict becomes an opportunity for understanding. Instead of reacting immediately, both partners take time to listen. Instead of trying to win the argument, they try to understand each other's perspective. And because neither person feels the need to control the outcome, solutions often appear naturally. The goal is no longer to protect the ego. The goal is to maintain harmony. The quiet recognition. When true union finally begins forming, there is often a quiet recognition between both individuals. It doesn't always arrive with dramatic declarations. Sometimes it appears gradually. The arguments become less frequent. The tension slowly disappears. Communication becomes smoother. And one day, both partners realize something surprising. The relationship that once felt complicated now feels simple. They are no longer trying to force anything. They are no longer constantly analyzing every interaction. They are simply living their lives together, peacefully. And in that peaceful space, the twin flame connection reveals its true purpose. Not as a dramatic love story filled with endless emotional storms, but as a powerful partnership between two people who have grown strong enough to love without fear. That is the essence of true union. But to understand it fully, we must explore the subtle signs that reveal when a connection is moving closer to this stage. Because true union has a very different energy than false union, And once you learn to recognize those differences, the journey becomes much clearer. After everything we have explored so far, the confusion of false union, the role of ego, and the long process of emotional healing, a natural question begins to arise. How do you actually recognize true union? Because many people on the twin flame journey expect union to appear as a dramatic moment. They imagine a sudden event where everything becomes perfectly clear, where both partners realize at the same time that they are destined to be together forever. But in reality, true union rarely arrives like a lightning strike. Instead, it often appears quietly, gradually, almost gently. It doesn't necessarily announce itself with grand gestures or intense emotional fireworks. In fact, many twin flames say that the moment they began experiencing true union, the relationship actually became much calmer than they expected. And that calmness is one of the first and most important signs. The first sign, inner peace. Perhaps the clearest sign that someone is approaching true union is a deep sense of inner peace. Earlier in the journey, the twin flame connection can feel overwhelming. Every message, every interaction, every moment of distance can trigger strong emotional reactions. One day you feel hopeful. The next day you feel anxious. The relationship seems to control your emotional state. But something begins to change when true healing takes place. Instead of constantly monitoring the relationship, you start focusing more on your own life. Your inner world becomes more stable. You no longer wake up wondering what your twin flame is thinking or feeling. You simply wake up feeling grounded. Peace begins replacing emotional turbulence. And the most surprising part is that this peace does not depend on whether your twin flame is physically present or not. It exists inside you. This inner stability creates a completely new foundation for the relationship. Because when two people meet from a place of peace, their connection naturally becomes calmer as well. The second sign, the end of obsession. Another powerful sign of true union is the end of obsession. During the earlier stages of the twin flame journey, it is very common to feel almost consumed by the connection. Thoughts about your twin flame may appear constantly. You may analyze every interaction, every message, every silence. You may search for signs, synchronicities, or hidden meanings in everyday events. This phase is often intense and emotionally exhausting. But as healing progresses, something surprising happens. The constant mental focus on the relationship begins to fade. Not because the love disappears, but because your sense of identity becomes stronger. You begin rediscovering your own passions, goals, and purpose. Your life becomes larger than the relationship. And ironically, this is exactly when the connection becomes healthier. Because love no longer feels like an addiction. It becomes a natural part of life rather than the center of your emotional universe. The third sign, freedom instead of control. In false union, the relationship often contains subtle forms of control. Someone may feel the need to monitor their partner's behavior. They may worry about losing the relationship. They may try to influence how the other person acts or feels. But in true union, something remarkable happens. The need for control disappears. Both partners begin trusting the connection naturally. There is no longer a constant need to check, analyze, or protect the relationship. Instead, there is freedom. Each person feels comfortable being themselves. They respect each other's individuality. They understand that love cannot be forced or controlled. And this freedom creates a much healthier dynamic. Because when two people feel safe being authentic, the relationship becomes a place of genuine connection rather than emotional pressure. The fourth sign, emotional stability. Earlier in the twin flame journey, emotional reactions can be extremely intense. Small misunderstandings may trigger large arguments. Minor delays in communication may create unnecessary worry. But as both individuals mature emotionally, these reactions begin changing. Instead of reacting immediately, they pause. They reflect. They communicate calmly. This does not mean they never disagree. Every relationship still contains moments of tension. But the difference is how those moments are handled. In true union, conflict no longer feels like a threat to the relationship. It becomes an opportunity for understanding. Both partners listen more carefully. They try to see the situation from each other's perspective. And because their self-worth no longer depends entirely on the relationship, disagreements lose their emotional intensity. This emotional stability creates an atmosphere of safety. Both people feel comfortable expressing themselves honestly. And that honesty strengthens the connection even further. The fifth sign, mutual growth. True union also creates an environment where both individuals continue evolving. Instead of stagnating, the relationship becomes a source of inspiration. Each partner encourages the other's personal growth. They support each other's goals and dreams. They celebrate each other's achievements rather than competing or feeling threatened. In some cases, twin flames in true union even begin collaborating in meaningful ways. They may build projects together. They may pursue shared missions that contribute something positive to the world. Their connection becomes not only a personal relationship, but also a partnership with purpose. This shared sense of direction strengthens their bond even more. Because they are not simply existing together. They are growing together. The sixth sign, natural synchronicity. Many twin flames report that once they approach true union, life begins unfolding with a surprising sense of synchronicity. Opportunities appear at the right time. Conversations happen exactly when they are needed. Paths align in ways that feel almost effortless. This does not mean life becomes perfect. Challenges still exist. But there is a sense that the relationship flows with life rather than constantly fighting against it. Earlier in the journey, twin flames often feel like they are struggling to keep the connection alive. In true union, the connection feels self-sustaining. It no longer requires constant effort to maintain harmony. It simply flows. The seventh sign, a quiet sense of home. Perhaps the most beautiful sign of true union is something very difficult to describe with words. It is the feeling of coming home. Not a dramatic emotional high. Not overwhelming excitement. But a quiet recognition. A sense that you can finally relax in the presence of the other person. You don't feel the need to impress them. You don't feel the need to protect yourself emotionally. You simply feel comfortable being who you are. And they feel the same. This sense of home is deeply peaceful. It feels familiar. Safe. Stable. After years of emotional storms on the twin flame journey, this calm connection can feel almost surprising. Many people expect union to feel intense and dramatic forever. But the truth is that real love often feels surprisingly simple. The paradox of true union. Here's the paradox that many twin flames eventually discover. True union often arrives after you stop chasing it. When the obsession fades. When the need to control the outcome disappears. When both individuals focus on their own inner growth. That is when the connection finally stabilizes. Because true union is not something that can be forced into existence. It emerges naturally when two people become emotionally ready for it. And that readiness is not measured by how much they want the relationship. It is measured by how peacefully they can exist within themselves. Once that inner peace exists in both individuals, the connection changes completely. Love becomes free. The relationship becomes stable. And what once felt like a chaotic spiritual journey transforms into something much simpler. Two people who have grown strong enough to love each other without fear. But there is one final truth about the twin flame journey that many people struggle to accept. Sometimes, the path to true union requires experiencing something first that feels very different. Something that may seem like a mistake, but is actually a powerful lesson. That stage is what we explored earlier as false union. And understanding why so many twin flames pass through that stage can reveal one of the deepest lessons of the entire journey. After exploring the nature of false union and the deeper qualities of true union, everything begins to lead toward one fundamental realization. At the heart of the difference between these two stages lies a single, powerful contrast. Control versus freedom. Almost every relationship challenge that appears during the twin flame journey can eventually be traced back to this core dynamic. When the connection is influenced by fear, insecurity, or unresolved wounds, people instinctively try to control the relationship. But when the connection evolves through healing, self-awareness, and emotional maturity, love begins to operate through freedom. Understanding this difference can completely transform the way someone experiences their twin flame path. Because once you recognize the presence of control or freedom in a relationship, you begin seeing the deeper truth behind the emotional patterns that once seemed confusing. The subtle nature of control. Control in relationships rarely looks obvious. Most people do not wake up in the morning consciously deciding to control their partner. Instead, control appears quietly, disguised as concern, love, or protection. Someone might say, "I just want to make sure everything is okay."
Or,
"I'm only asking because I care about you." But beneath these words, a deeper emotional current may be flowing. A need for certainty, a fear of losing the relationship, a desire to prevent pain before it can happen. These emotions are deeply human. Almost everyone experiences them at some point in life. But in a twin flame connection, where emotional intensity is already amplified, these impulses can become even stronger. Because the bond feels so meaningful, the idea of losing it can feel unbearable. And when fear becomes strong enough, the mind begins searching for ways to guarantee security. That is when control quietly enters the relationship. The many forms of control. Control does not always appear as obvious dominance or manipulation. In fact, many forms of control are so subtle that people do not even realize they are happening. For example, someone may start monitoring their partner's communication habits. They might notice how long it takes for messages to be answered. They might wonder who their partner is spending time with. They might feel uneasy when their partner wants time alone. None of these behaviors necessarily come from bad intentions. Often, they come from fear. Fear that something could change. Fear that the connection might disappear. Fear that the love they cherish might somehow slip away. But control can also appear in emotional expectations. Someone might believe their partner should behave a certain way to prove their love. They might expect constant reassurance. They might feel hurt when their partner does not express affection exactly as they hoped. Over time, these expectations can create pressure inside the relationship. And when pressure builds, freedom begins to shrink. When control creates resistance. One of the most ironic aspects of control is that it often produces the opposite result of what someone hopes to achieve. When a person tries to control a relationship in order to keep it secure, their partner may begin feeling restricted. Even if they still care deeply, they may feel a subtle loss of independence. And when people feel their freedom shrinking, their natural instinct is often to create space again. This dynamic can easily lead to the push and pull cycles that many twin flames experience. One person moves closer, trying to secure the relationship. The other moves away, trying to regain their freedom. The closer the first person moves, the further the second person retreats. And with every repetition of this cycle, both partners feel more confused and emotionally drained. Neither of them intended to create conflict. Both of them care about the relationship. But the energy of control slowly transforms the connection into something tense and fragile. The shift toward freedom. True union begins when both individuals gradually release the need to control the relationship. This does not happen overnight. Letting go of control often requires deep inner healing. It requires learning to trust life itself. But once this shift begins, the entire energy of the connection changes. Instead of constantly monitoring the relationship, both partners begin focusing on their own personal growth. Instead of asking how to keep the relationship secure, they begin asking how to become healthier individuals. And this internal shift creates a new emotional environment, a space where love can exist without pressure, a space where both people feel safe being themselves. Freedom in true union. Freedom inside a relationship does not mean distance or emotional detachment. In fact, it often creates deeper closeness. Because when someone knows they are loved without conditions or expectations, they feel safe opening their heart fully. In true union, both partners respect each other's individuality. They understand that each person has their own thoughts, interests, and emotional rhythms. They allow space for independence. They trust the connection without constantly trying to protect it. And because there is no pressure to prove anything, love flows naturally. Communication becomes easier. Affection becomes genuine rather than forced. The relationship feels relaxed rather than tense. Freedom transforms the connection into a partnership between two people who genuinely enjoy being together. Love that does not fear loss. Perhaps the deepest aspect of freedom in true union is the absence of constant fear. In earlier stages of the journey, many people fear losing the relationship. They worry about what might happen if circumstances change. They try to predict or prevent potential problems. But in true union, something inside both individuals becomes more stable. They understand that love cannot be guaranteed or controlled. And surprisingly, accepting this truth creates a sense of peace rather than anxiety. Because when you stop trying to control the future, you begin appreciating the present more deeply. Every moment together becomes meaningful, not because it is permanent, but because it is genuine. And this perspective transforms the emotional tone of the relationship. Instead of clinging to each other out of fear, both people remain connected through choice. The strength of voluntary love. When love exists within freedom, it becomes incredibly powerful. Think about the difference between someone staying in a relationship because they feel obligated and someone staying because they truly want to. The first situation creates pressure. The second creates joy. In true union, both partners remain together not because they must, but because they choose to. Every day, every moment. And that voluntary connection strengthens the bond in ways control never could. Because when two people know they are free to leave but still choose to stay, their love becomes deeply authentic. A question worth asking. If someone wants to understand whether their relationship is moving toward true union or remaining in false union, there is a simple but revealing question they can ask themselves. Does this relationship feel like freedom or like pressure?
Freedom allows people to grow.
Pressure creates anxiety. Freedom encourages authenticity. Pressure encourages performance. Freedom strengthens connection naturally. Pressure forces connection artificially. The answer to this question often reveals the deeper state of the relationship. And once someone begins recognizing the difference between control and freedom, they can consciously start shifting toward a healthier dynamic. Because true union is not created by holding on to love tightly. It is created by allowing love to exist without fear. The path forward. Learning to release control is one of the most important steps on the twin flame journey. It requires patience. It requires self-reflection. It requires courage to trust something deeper than fear. But once both individuals begin embracing freedom within the relationship, something remarkable happens. The emotional turbulence that once defined the connection begins fading. Arguments become less intense. Misunderstandings become easier to resolve. And the relationship gradually transforms into something far more stable. A partnership between two people who are no longer trying to possess each other, but are simply choosing to walk through life together. Yet, even with this understanding, there is still one important question left to explore. If true union requires so much inner growth and emotional maturity, why do so many twin flames experience false union first? The answer to that question reveals one of the deepest lessons hidden within the twin flame journey itself. There comes a moment in the twin flame journey that feels almost invisible from the outside, yet internally it is monumental. It is not dramatic. There are no fireworks. There is no sudden confession of love, no romantic reunion scene, no cinematic moment where two people run toward each other in slow motion. Instead, something far more powerful happens. Control dissolves. And when control dissolves, the illusion of false union begins to collapse completely. This is the turning point. But to understand why this moment is so transformative, we must first understand something subtle about the human ego. Because ego rarely announces itself loudly. More often, it hides behind things that appear noble. It hides behind love. It hides behind concern. It hides behind the desire to fix the relationship. And for a long time on the twin flame journey, both partners may unknowingly operate from this place. They believe they are trying to hold the connection together. But in reality, they are trying to control it. The subtle nature of control. Control is rarely obvious. Most people do not wake up in the morning and think, I want to control the person I love. Instead, control disguises itself as fear. Fear of losing the connection. Fear of abandonment. Fear that if they stop trying, everything will fall apart. So they hold on tighter. They check messages repeatedly. They analyze every interaction. They replay conversations over and over again. They look for hidden meanings in every word. They ask themselves questions like, why did they take so long to reply? Why did they suddenly become distant? Did I say something wrong? What if they're losing feelings? At first glance, these thoughts seem normal. After all, everyone worries sometimes in relationships. But in the context of a twin flame journey, these patterns can become extreme. Because the emotional intensity of the connection amplifies everything. And when emotions intensify, the ego becomes louder. It demands certainty. It demands reassurance. It demands control. But here is the paradox. The more someone tries to control a twin flame connection, the more unstable it becomes. The runner-chaser dynamic. This is why so many twin flame journeys fall into the classic runner-chaser dynamic. One person tries to hold the connection closer. The other feels overwhelmed and pulls away. The first person senses the distance and tries even harder. The second person retreats even further. The cycle repeats. Again, and again, and again, until both people feel exhausted. This dynamic is not punishment. It is reflection. The runner reflects the fear of intimacy. The chaser reflects the fear of abandonment. Both are expressions of ego. Both are wounds asking to be healed. And neither can lead to true union. Because true union cannot exist where fear is driving behavior. True union requires something radically different. It requires surrender. The moment of exhaustion. Eventually, something begins to shift. Not suddenly, but gradually. After months or even years of emotional highs and lows, many people on the twin flame journey reach a point where they simply cannot continue the same patterns anymore. They feel emotionally drained. The constant analyzing becomes exhausting. The waiting becomes painful. The chasing becomes humiliating. And the silence becomes unbearable. So one day, they do something unexpected. They stop. They stop checking their phone every 5 minutes. They stop trying to decode every message. They stop trying to control what the other person does or feels. At first, this stopping feels terrifying, because the ego interprets it as giving up. But in reality, something very different is happening. They are not giving up on the connection. They are giving up on controlling it. And that changes everything. The birth of emotional freedom. When control dissolves, something remarkable appears.
Space.
For the first time in a long time, the connection is no longer suffocating under expectations. Instead of obsessing about the other person's actions, the individual turns inward. They begin asking different questions.
Not,
why are they doing this to me? But, what is this experience teaching me?
not,
How can I make them come back? But, how can I become more whole within myself? This shift is subtle, but it is the beginning of true union consciousness. Because the twin flame journey was never designed to make one person dependent on the other. It was designed to awaken self-mastery. And self-mastery begins the moment someone stops trying to control what they cannot control. A real-life illustration. Imagine a woman named Maya. For years, she believed that her twin flame, Daniel, was the missing piece of her happiness. When they first met, the connection was electrifying. They could talk for hours. They felt understood in ways they never had before. But the relationship quickly became turbulent. Daniel would sometimes disappear for weeks. Maya would panic. She would send long emotional messages asking what went wrong. Daniel would feel overwhelmed and withdraw further. The cycle repeated countless times. For a long time, Maya believed the solution was to try harder, to love harder, to communicate more. But none of it worked. In fact, the harder she tried, the more distant Daniel became. Eventually, Maya reached a breaking point. Not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. One evening, after staring at her phone for hours waiting for a reply that never came, she realized something important. Her entire life had become centered around Daniel's presence or absence. Her happiness depended on whether he responded. Her mood depended on whether he reached out. And suddenly, she asked herself a painful question. When did I stop living my own life? That night, Maya made a quiet decision. She would no longer chase. Not as a strategy. Not as a manipulation. But as an act of self-respect. She began focusing on herself again. She returned to hobbies she had abandoned. She reconnected with friends. She started therapy to heal deeper childhood wounds. Months passed. Something unexpected happened. She stopped feeling anxious about Daniel. She stopped waiting. She stopped needing the connection to validate her worth. And for the first time since they met, she felt peaceful. This was not rejection. This was liberation. The irony of surrender. Here is one of the greatest paradoxes of the twin flame journey. The moment someone truly releases control is often the moment the connection begins to transform.
Why?
Because control creates pressure, and pressure creates resistance. But surrender creates space, and space allows authenticity. When the chasing stops, the runner often begins to feel something unfamiliar. Curiosity. They notice the silence. They notice the absence of pressure. They begin to reflect. Sometimes they reach out again. Sometimes they do not. But something deeper shifts regardless. The energy between them changes. It becomes lighter, healthier, more mature. Because the foundation is no longer fear. It is freedom. A question worth asking. At this stage of the journey, an important question arises. And it is a question only the soul can answer. If the person you love never returned, would you still be able to live a meaningful and peaceful life? For many people earlier in the journey, the answer is no. But as healing deepens, the answer gradually becomes yes. And strangely, that yes is what opens the door to true union. Because true union is not built on need. It is built on choice. Two people do not come together because they cannot live without each other. They come together because they are already whole. And they choose to walk the path side by side. The quiet preparation for true union. This stage is rarely glamorous. There are no dramatic declarations. There is no instant reconciliation. Instead, it feels like a quiet rebuilding of the self. Old wounds surface and heal. Old patterns dissolve. Old fears lose their power. And the person who once chased desperately becomes someone entirely different. Someone grounded. Someone peaceful. Someone free. Ironically, this is the exact energy that true union requires. Because a relationship between two awakened individuals cannot survive on emotional dependency. It thrives on mutual freedom, mutual growth, mutual respect. And that is why the dissolution of control is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of a new phase. One where love is no longer driven by fear, but by consciousness. Reflection. If you find yourself at this stage of the journey, ask yourself honestly, are you trying to control the connection? Or are you learning to trust its natural unfolding? Are you holding on from fear? Or allowing love to breathe? The answer to these questions reveals whether you are still experiencing false union energy, or stepping into the consciousness of true union. Because the most powerful shift in the twin flame journey is not when two people finally reunite. It is when one person finally lets go of the need to control the outcome. And in doing so, they discover their own freedom. In the next chapter, we will explore something equally important. Why true union cannot happen until both twin flames have matured emotionally and spiritually. Because even when control dissolves, union still requires one final transformation. By the time someone reaches this stage of the twin flame journey, something profound has already changed. Not necessarily in the relationship, but within the person. The desperation is gone. The constant questioning has quieted. The need to control the outcome has dissolved. And in its place, something much calmer begins to grow. A deep sense of inner stability. This is the silent preparation for true union. Because contrary to popular belief, true union is not the moment when two people finally come together after a long separation. It is not a dramatic reunion scene. It is not the reward at the end of suffering. True union is something much deeper. It is the natural result of two people who have become emotionally, mentally, and spiritually whole. And only when that wholeness exists can the connection evolve into something stable. Why false union always feels unstable. Earlier in the journey, the connection may have felt intense, magnetic, irresistible, but also chaotic. There may have been moments of passion followed by sudden silence, deep conversations followed by painful misunderstandings, unexplainable closeness followed by distance. Many people interpret this instability as proof that the connection is powerful. But in reality, instability is usually a sign that both individuals are still carrying unresolved wounds. And when those wounds meet, they create emotional turbulence. For example, if one partner fears abandonment, they may become anxious when communication slows down. If the other partner fears losing independence, they may withdraw when the relationship becomes emotionally intense. Neither person is intentionally hurting the other. They are simply reacting from old survival patterns. This is why false union often feels like an emotional roller coaster. The connection is real. The attraction is real. But the foundation is unstable. Because the ego is still involved. And ego always creates conflict. What changes before true union? For true union to happen, something very important must occur. Both individuals must go through a period of deep inner transformation. This transformation rarely happens while the two are constantly together. In fact, it often happens during periods of separation. Separation forces both people to face themselves. Without the distraction of the relationship, they are confronted with their own fears, insecurities, and emotional patterns. This can be uncomfortable, but it is necessary, because growth rarely happens in comfort. During this phase, each person begins to develop emotional maturity. They learn how to regulate their emotions. They learn how to take responsibility for their reactions. They learn that love cannot replace self-worth. And perhaps most importantly, they learn how to be happy on their own. This stage is crucial, because true union is not about two incomplete people completing each other. It is about two complete people walking together. The energy of emotional independence. When someone reaches this level of inner maturity, their energy changes dramatically. They no longer seek validation from the other person. They no longer need constant reassurance. They no longer interpret every silence as rejection. Instead, they feel grounded within themselves. They trust their own worth. They respect their own boundaries. And because of this, the connection becomes lighter, more peaceful, more natural. It no longer feels like a battle for emotional security. It feels like a shared experience. This is one of the clearest signs that someone has moved from false union consciousness into true union readiness. Love becomes a choice, not a necessity, when both souls reach the same frequency. One of the most fascinating aspects of the twin flame journey is that growth on one side often triggers growth on the other, even when the two people are not in contact. As one person heals, releases control, and becomes emotionally balanced, the energetic dynamic between them shifts. Sometimes this shift happens slowly. Sometimes it happens suddenly. But eventually, there comes a moment when both individuals reach a similar level of emotional awareness. And when that happens, something remarkable occurs. The connection no longer feels like a struggle. It feels aligned. Conversations flow naturally again. Misunderstandings decrease. Both people are able to listen without defensiveness. They communicate with honesty instead of fear. And perhaps for the first time, the relationship feels calm. This calmness may surprise those who are used to the earlier intensity. But in reality, this calmness is the true sign of spiritual maturity. Because real love does not need constant drama to feel meaningful. It thrives in peace. A story of true union. Consider the story of Alex and Sophia. When they first met, their connection was immediate and overwhelming. They shared similar dreams, similar values, and a powerful emotional bond. But within months, the relationship became complicated. Alex struggled with commitment. Sophia struggled with fear of abandonment. Their connection quickly turned into a cycle of closeness and distance. When Alex felt overwhelmed, he would withdraw. When Sophia sensed distance, she would chase. Each reaction triggered the other's deepest fears. Eventually, the relationship collapsed under the weight of unresolved emotions. For a long time, Sophia believed that losing Alex meant losing her soulmate. She felt broken, but over time, something changed. Instead of focusing on the loss, she began focusing on herself. She started therapy. She explored meditation. She worked on healing childhood wounds she had ignored for years. Slowly, her sense of self-worth grew stronger. She stopped defining her happiness through Alex. Meanwhile, Alex was also going through his own transformation. Without Sophia in his life, he began confronting his fear of emotional vulnerability. He realized that his tendency to withdraw had hurt not only Sophia, but many people in his life. Through reflection and personal growth, he began learning how to open emotionally. Years later, their paths crossed again, unexpectedly. But this time, something was different. There was no anxiety, no pressure, no emotional games. They spoke openly about the past. They acknowledged the pain they had caused each other. And instead of falling back into old patterns, they approached the connection with maturity. Their relationship grew slowly,
Steadily.
peacefully. For the first time, the love between them felt stable. Not because the connection had changed, but because they had changed. This is what true union looks like. True union is not perfect. It is important to understand something crucial. True union does not mean that the relationship becomes perfect. Disagreements can still happen. Life challenges still exist. External circumstances can still create stress. But the difference lies in how those challenges are handled. Instead of reacting from fear, both individuals respond from awareness. Instead of blaming each other, they work as a team. Instead of trying to control the relationship, they nurture it with patience and respect. The foundation becomes emotional safety. And from that safety, love can grow in a healthy way. The real purpose of the journey. Many people begin the twin flame journey believing its purpose is romantic reunion. But those who reach the final stages often discover something surprising. The real purpose was never just the relationship. It was transformation. The connection acted as a catalyst. It forced both individuals to confront their deepest wounds. It pushed them to grow beyond their limitations. It awakened a level of self-awareness they might never have reached otherwise. And in doing so, it prepared them for a love that is conscious rather than reactive. This is why true union is rare. Not because the connection itself is rare, but because true emotional and spiritual maturity requires courage. It requires patience. And it requires a willingness to face oneself honestly. If you are walking this journey, remember something important. True union cannot be forced. It cannot be chased. And it cannot be controlled. It unfolds naturally when both individuals become ready. So instead of asking, when will union happen? Perhaps the better question is, who am I becoming along the way? Because the greatest gift of the twin flame journey is not simply finding the other half of your soul. It is discovering the strength, wisdom, and wholeness that already exists within you. And when two people reach that state of wholeness, union is no longer something they desperately seek. It becomes something they consciously choose. Every day, again and again. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on your own journey. Have you experienced the difference between false union and true union? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to explore more insights about the twin flame path, emotional healing, and spiritual growth, make sure to subscribe and join this community. Because the journey toward conscious love is one we walk together.
Thank you for spending this moment with me. If this message resonated with your soul, remember to subscribe and continue this journey with us here on Twin Flame Journey. And always remember, what is meant for your soul will always find its way back to you.